There's no good way to end the sermon today, and so I, I'll do the best I can, bringing it to some conclusion, but it's quite unfinished. So if you're used to practical takeaways, instructions at the end of a message for how we're going to apply this, apologize. I apologize in advance. Are you okay? I mean, try to stay with it, but maybe I'll do better next week. I want to focus on the question asked by the religious leaders at the end of the story. Are we blind too? These are religious leaders. In the New Living Translation, it says, "Are you calling us blind?" In the New Revised Standard, it says, "What? We aren't blind, are we?" My wife says that there are people who can look right at something and not see it. I don't know what she's talking about. I tell her that there are some people who can see something that they're not looking at. Take, for instance, the strange case of Dee Fletcher, an Italian woman who in 1988, young, energetic, jumps into the shower of a newly renovated apartment just outside of Milan. She doesn't know that when they renovated the apartment, they improperly installed the gas propane water heater. And so the fumes, carbon monoxide, build up quickly in the shower while she's showering. Within a few moments, she slumps to the floor of the shower, motionless, unconscious. She might have died were not for her husband, Carlo, an engineer, who came home at exactly the right moment, pulled her out of the shower, resuscitated her. They rushed her to the hospital unconscious. And over the next few hours, she regained her consciousness and was able to hear and respond, but she could not see, not anything. Most of the time, those poisoned by carbon monoxide don't lose faculties like this, but on rare occasions they do. And Dee Fletcher did. The doctors diagnosed her condition appropriately as cortical blindness. There's a part in the back of the brain that helps the eyes interpret what they're seeing. And through the use of an fMRI, they discovered Dee had now brain damage and was just not able to see. The problem was that over the next few days, she gradually regained some of her vision. For instance, she was able to discern between colors, not just between red and blue, but between different shades of red or blue. She was able to see the white and the blue in the sky, even able to see her husband's blue sweater, such that she said, "You wore that yesterday." When her mother handed her a cup of hot coffee, she was able to see the hairs on the back of her mother's hand, but she was not able to see the hand. The physicians thought this might improve over time, only it never did. Dee reached a certain level, and she got stuck there. To this day, if you were to go to her house, still alive, outside of Milan, she would have things in the right place, and she would be able to see color, but she could not see shapes. So she went to a neuroscientist, Melvin Goodale, in Scotland, who put her through a series of experiments. And one of the first ones he did was to take a number 2 pencil like this and hold it up in front of her and asked if she could see it. All she could see was the yellow. She could not see the pencil. But before he pulled it away, something extraordinary happened. Dee said, "Wait a minute. Give me that pencil." And she reached out with her finger, and in exact proportion to the width of the pencil, closed it around the pencil and took it from him. The scientist took it away, and he turned it vertically, held it out again. She saw only yellow, but this time she adjusted her hand in mid-flight, put it around the pencil, took it from. He did this diagonally, and she did it again. He put rectangular blocks in front of her of varying widths, and each time she reached her hands around the block and squeezed it in perfect proportion to the width, but never saw the block. They gave her a 3x5 card, asked her to stick it through a slot. She did it flawlessly, though she never saw the card and she never saw the slot. You think I'm crazy, don't you? You can read the story in a book called Sight Unseen by Melvin Goodale, the scientist who conducted the experiments. On one day, they were taking her through a series of experiments, and her husband, Carlo, was discouraged because she failed every test. He suggested that they go out to the woods and have a picnic, and maybe it would change her mood. So they packed the picnic basket, and they headed out to the place. Only the place they were going was a landing, a flat somewhere in the Italian Alps. You had to go through the woods, a path in the woods, in order to get there. The scientist walked behind Dee, and even though she could see nothing, she ducked at the appropriate time. When the branch was hanging low, she stepped over a stump or a log, and when they unpacked the basket, she reached for the fork or the knife, even though she never saw the tree, saw the stump, saw the knife or the fork. Now, if this is blowing your mind, it was theirs too. They started a series of experiments, and they opened up a rather new field in neuroscience, the study of unconscious vision. If conscious vision is the ability to look at something and see it because you can see it, unconscious vision is the ability to act on something you cannot see because you're familiar with it. I wonder if this is what Paul meant when he said, "Fix your eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, and what is unseen is eternal." I wonder if this is how Hagar saw the well in the desert that a moment ago was invisible to her. Is this how the servant of the prophet Elijah saw the armies of the Lord in the mountains when a moment ago he looked and saw nothing? Is this what the writer of Hebrews means when he says, we are, present tense, encompassed by a cloud of witnesses. Is this what Peter meant when he said in 1 Peter 1, we have an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade, kept in heaven for you. Heaven, remember, is not so much up and away, it is over. Heaven is not the life after. Heaven is another dimension alongside the present life. Is it possible, I'm asking, for someone in this world to see realities in the other one? Are you okay? Now, I framed the story like that because it helps me grasp the leader's question. Are you calling us blind? What? We're not blind, are we? And I'm starting to wonder if the answer is maybe. It helps me understand what's happening in John 9 differently. I've known this story most of my life. I've preached from it multiple times. I have never quite saw it like I see it now. For starters, if you're in the Catholic tradition, the way you come at this story is to say that the man was lost, and then early in the story, like verse 7, he was baptized, and then in his baptism, he was converted. In verse 6, Jesus says, after he rubs mud on his eyes, go wash in the pool called Sent. The man in verse 7 went to the pool, washed, came back seeing, and the Catholic tradition would say, see, there it is. He washed in the pool. The man is baptized. Now he can see. He's converted. The problem, of course, is that if it's true, and it might be, the man was baptized by himself. Not even the Catholic tradition would accept that. And he's baptized in verse 7 before he actually believes, which is in verse 38. So you have to explain how it is somebody is being baptized in verse 7 who doesn't even believe until verse 38. I mean, it's possible, but there's at least room for doubt. Are you with me? But thankfully, the evangelicals are here to save the day. The way the Protestants or evangelicals handle the text is to say the Catholics are right about this, that the man represents spiritual blindness, does not know who Jesus is. It isn't baptism that converts him, it's obedience. It's not because he went in the pool, it's because he went to the pool in obedience, and that obedience is what changed his life. And then when the man was dragged before the Pharisees and the neighbors and the religious leaders and asked to defend himself, the man testified, or what evangelicals call shared his faith with the skeptics. You can tell I'm not buying this. The problem, of course, is that if the evangelicals are right, then the man is cured without even asking for it. And he testifies to a faith he doesn't even have until verse 38. So you have the man testifying to something that isn't yet in him, and the faith that he has in the end is not cognitive. It isn't an intellectual belief that Jesus is the so-called, properly stated Son of God. Belief in this story is acting, it's seeing, it's doing something. So I'm having problems with both the Catholics and the evangelicals. Are you still there? My wife usually says, why do you always do this to stories? And the reason, you guys, is because like you, I've known the story all my life. And the only way that God can speak to me about something I am so familiar with is to deconstruct it. Whenever I pick a story like this up, one that I know, the first thing I try to do is to move from certainty to uncertainty as fast as I can. Because in uncertainty, beautiful things can happen. It isn't so much the pursuit of knowledge. It's the pursuit of ignorance that will make you better. Scientists speak about their knowledge, but the really good scientists speak about their ignorance. It's what they don't know yet and want to know. So let me retell the story very quickly, since you already know it. It occurs in 4 scenes. First is the miracle. That's the first 7 verses. Second comes the trial or the inquisition. That starts in verse 8 and it goes to the mid-30s. After the trial or the inquisition comes the conversion. This is where he sees Jesus and he asks, do you believe in the Son of Man? He says, Lord, I believe. And finally, the 4th scene is the punchline. This is where they say, what? Are we blind too? And Jesus says, if you thought you were blind, you could see. But because you think you can see, you are actually blind. Jesus is walking along one day, and he sees a blind man who does not ask to be cured. And when he sees the blind man, the disciples draw his attention and say, who was it that sinned? Was it him or was it his parents? They always figure if something's wrong, he did something to deserve this. Jesus, knowing that sometimes bad things can happen and we don't deserve it, go figure, says, neither of these things. This was done so that the work of God might be manifest in this person's life. And here's where it gets interesting. In the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, the prophet describes Israel, the people of God, as being blind. In Isaiah 42, the prophet says, who is blind like my servant, blind like the one committed to me, blind like the servant of the Lord? He says, my people are always hearing and never comprehending. They see something, but they never perceive. They don't get the thing they're seeing. He says their hearts are calloused, their ears are dull, and their eyes are closed. This is a remarkable thing to say, because he is not talking about people in the world. He's not talking about sinners who need to come to Jesus. Hear the language again. Who is blind like my servant? Blind like the one already committed to me. Blind like the servant of the Lord. He's not talking about the world. He's talking about us. We hear things and we never comprehend them. We pick things up and we never really know what it is. We gather in communities like this every Sunday and never comprehend what this is. This church. You're blind. You can sit right in it, not even see it. This is not the world's problem. This is religious people's problem. Now, the prophet comes back at the end of this in Isaiah 42. And he says, I will send a servant of the Lord. And when he comes, he will lead the blind along paths they have not known, along unfamiliar ways. He will guide them. He will turn the darkness into light before them, and he will make the rough places smooth. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, said the prophet, and he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. Wait for it, to open the eyes of the blind, to release from the darkness those who cannot see. He's talking about his own people. So what's happening in John chapter 9 is that story embodied in the life of one individual. The man born blind is not just an individual. He is also a type of people. He's a nation. He's a church. And Jesus coming into the story is the servant of the Lord that Isaiah talked about. And he's saying more or less, I will do to this man what God is going to do to his people. I will open their eyes so they can see. Who sinned, said the disciples. Jesus says, neither one sinned. This happened so that you would get that. When he said this, he spit on the ground. He made mud with his fingers. He rubbed it in the man's eyes and said, go wash in a pool called Sent. The man goes to the pool, he washes, and he comes back seeing. The neighbors hear about this, and they're beside themselves. They say, this can't be the same guy. He hasn't seen a thing in his life. And the guy kept saying, I am the guy. They said, nah, you just look like him. He said, no, I would know. I am the guy. And they said, well, then how did this happen? The guy said, I don't know. He told me to wash in the pool. I washed. I came back seeing. They said, what is his name? The guy said, the man they called Jesus. Well, where is he? He said, I don't know. They said, you don't know much, do you? So they kicked him up to the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, they solve everything. And so the man meets with the Pharisees, and these are these kind of religious professionals, and they ask him the same rigmarole, and they said, now you know that whatever happened, this cannot be from God because he did this on the Sabbath. See, their mind is so cluttered with furniture from all of these other assumptions that they've had their whole life. We know how this works, this religion thing. We know how this works. And this guy is breaking the rule. They turn to the guy and say, you're the one that started this. Who do you say he is? Guy said, he's a prophet. Well, they kick the guy out of the room and they bring the guy's parents in and they say, this can't be the same guy. Is this your son? Was he born blind? What happened to the guy? And the parents say, well, he is our son and he was born blind, but I can't tell you what happened. He's of age. You ask him. They throw him under the bus. So they appeal to the religious leaders who bring him in and they start the conversation like this. We know that the man who did this is a sinner. So tell us again, how did this happen? Man said, you keep asking me this. I keep telling you the same story. Do you want to be one of his disciples too? And the word says, they revile him. They say, we are disciples of Moses. You are the disciple of Jesus. That's the closest to the truth anyone has come in this story yet. Don't start lecturing us. The man says, now this is remarkable. The guy opened my eyes and you don't know where he come from. You say that God can't answer the prayer of a sinner, yet he answered this man's prayer. How can you say he isn't from God? And now, on top of reviling him, they throw him out of the synagogue. You don't have a place in this religious system. Now, the man is spiritually homeless. Don't underestimate this. The only church he's ever known was the synagogue, and now he just got excommunicated for something just for telling the truth. Now that the man is spiritually homeless, nowhere to go, Jesus hears about it and goes looking for the man. And when he sees him, he says, do you believe in the Son of Man? Guy says, who is he? Tell me so I can believe. You know how hard it is to get a religious person to say that. Tell me so I can believe. Because we're sure we already do. And Jesus says, you're looking at him. The one speaking to you. That's him. And the guy goes, Lord, I believe. And then he worships. And the word there means literally to bow down. He literally falls on his knees and he starts worshiping a Jesus who only a second ago he met. Maybe it's just me, but there is an authenticity, there's a purity, there's a transparency in this man's faith that is so attractive to me. The Pharisees, overhearing this, rush in and they say, so what? Are we blind? Are you calling us blind? And then Jesus says it. If you thought you were blind, you would not have sinned. But because you think you can see, your sin remains. Oddly enough, at the beginning of the story, the man born blind is believed to have sinned. And at the end of the story, we learn he has not sinned at all. And at the beginning of the story, the religious leaders who see everything and are sure they have never sinned, at the end of the story are the one whose sins remain. At the end of the story, there is a clear distinction between somebody who was once blind and now he can see, and another group of people who could once see, and now, because of their assumptions and deep convictions, are blind. And this, church, is what I can't get over. Are we educating one another into a place of blindness? Has our certainty, our education, our deep convictions, what do we call it, passion today, have these things actually blinded us? So I came away from it just saying, Lord, I believe, but there is so much I don't see. I wonder if the place to start is with humility. Instead of talking about your knowledge, talk about your ignorance. Have my deep convictions, the places where I'm sure I'm right, kept me from seeing the places where other people are also right? Has my love for order, efficiency, structure kept me from seeing new revelation from God that is often disruptive and disorderly and chaotic? Have I shut my eyes to it because I can't get my hands around it? Has my love for logic, for rationale, clear explanations kept me from seeing the miracles in another person's life? Has my love for belonging and community kept me from seeing the value of a stranger that doesn't know the community? Has my love for a simple story kept me from seeing the real story? Has my frustration over the way things are in this world kept me from seeing the way things could be? Have I become cynical because I get it, when in fact the moral to the story is you don't get it precisely because you think you get it? What if I am as blind to the next world as this man is blind to this one? And what if by the power of God I could begin to see realities in the next world that no one else sees, and they're not fictional, and they're not just spiritual? We say that because we barely believe it. What if there are realities as physical and tangible in the next world that with unconscious vision, I can reach for it, I can pick it up and use it, I can step into it, I can own it, I can talk to it, I can navigate it, even though I never physically see it? What if most of the things you call heaven are already present in this world, but they're invisible to you. Because you were born blind. And your decision to follow Jesus didn't fix that. So I think it starts with humility. From there, if there is another step, I'm calling it hunger. Hunger. It's coming to the place where you say, man, I want this more than anything else. There's a scene in Mark chapter 10 where a blind guy named Bartimaeus is alongside the road. I know you've heard this story. And he hears that Jesus is going to come walking by in a few minutes. I said in the first hour, and I mean this, we'll argue about it later. Jesus, dear evangelical, is not walking by whenever you want him to. He walks by when he wants to. That's the time you call for him. You don't just sit there and say, when I'm done of this, no. When you hear he's coming, you cry. Bartimaeus, blind from birth, hears that Jesus is coming. He scrambles to his feet and he shouts out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And when he says it, all of the disciples and the religious leaders around him tell him to sit down and shut up. Don't make such a fool out of yourself. Do you know how you sound right now? There's lots of people here. Let them have access to him. Sit down. I think of a seeker in a church who doesn't know better. He hears things about Jesus and he just wants to know more. And sometimes in highly academic, intellectual environments, not that I would know any, we are surrounded by the guild who remembers how embarrassing it is to not know something you're apparently supposed to know. And so every new discovery, we just sort of keep it to ourselves and pretend like, oh yeah, I've always known that. And then now somebody stands up and blurts out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And the guild that is around him comes up and says, sit down, sit down. Do you know what you look like when you talk like that? Man, pretend, fake it. But he can't. And Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? And the man says, I just want to see. Well, this is odd because a few verses later, Jesus asks the same question to his disciples. What do you want me to do for you? And they say, grant that one of us would sit on your right and another on your left. Really? Now you're wondering who got the answer right. This guy is not concerned about positions of prominence or power. He just wants to see. And I wonder if that's the kind of hunger that is necessary in the kingdom of God. I don't care how long I've been a Christian. I don't care what I'm supposed to know, and I don't care what everyone else knows. There are things about Christ I don't understand, and as quickly as I can, I have to get into places of uncertainty, for in uncertainty, in my ignorance, God can teach me. Oh, this is what I want for us. The simplicity and audacity to say, I just want to see. Last, I want to leave you with hope. Because if you're here and you're thinking, man, I tell you what, I grew up in the church and I haven't got any of this. Here's a word. Ignore most of this and keep your focus on Jesus Christ. That's where you go. He will lead you to the next thing. You're closer than you think. You're not far. Stay with him. And if you grew up in church as I did, and you've heard most of this before, you could be pretty frustrated right now saying, so what you're telling me is I'm more ignorant than I thought. Yes, that's what I'm telling you, but it's not hopeless. He will lead the blind along ways they have not known, along unfamiliar paths. He will guide you. He will make the darkness light in front of you when you need it, and he will make the rough places smooth. There is hope. This can happen. It can happen to you. Would you bow your head? Jesus, on behalf of myself, and I think a few others in this room, open our eyes. We want to see. We've heard we can't. At best, we see through a glass darkly. But we do not see everything. We want to. Please, in Jesus' name.